Hey everybody, John the Other here, obviously. And I just read an article on CNN published Friday, July 19th, that's today, written by Jen Psaki, or Psaki, I guess, Psaki, the former White House communications director under President Obama. Predictably, she's attacking men in public life who have admitted to adopting personal versions of the Mike Pence Rule. A former Chief Justice named Bill Whaler Jr. and a Mississippi State Representative Robert Foster are both being held up as atavistic, shameful examples of unreformed maleness because they have each said publicly that they do not meet privately with or work privately with strange women without their wives also being present. In the case of Robert Foster, he declined to allow a female reporter to accompany him on a 15-hour ride-along during an upcoming campaign tour. The first rule of Fight Club is do not talk about Fight Club. I have believed for some time that whether it is acceptable or not, and whether it is permitted or not, men with careers or families or anything else to lose will have to start excluding women from private contact, and that means private meetings, shared office spaces, taxi rides, restaurant booths, business flights, political campaign ride-alongs, and any other closed-door space. And I guessed that this would be handled in a mostly unstated way. It would never be allowable to have in your corporate policy manual that meeting behind closed doors with women was to be avoided because sexism and patriarchy and so on and so forth. But the devastation of a false accusation is so destructive and so dangerous that whether it's allowed or it's forbidden, this kind of Mike Pence practice would become a necessary feature because anyone who ignored it would simply disappear as another piece of Me Too roadkill. And this next part I'm going to read to you is extremely obvious, but I have to say it anyway. Me Too is a false accusation movement. Yes, I know there are real accusations of real sexual misconduct. What Me Too has done with amazing effectiveness is to eliminate the distinction between a false accusation and a legitimate one, to radically increase the number of false accusations and to make a growing public roster of false accusers into feminist folk heroes. Due process and presumption of innocence are now effectively obsolete, which means that factual innocence is of little to no weight when the feminist media decides to unperson somebody based on an unfounded accusation. This is why the new rules of Wall Street are that female staffers and interns no longer get one-on-one meetings with male bosses or colleagues. A shared taxi ride with a female colleague is a game of Russian roulette. But for every company or public figure who might adopt the Mike Pence rule openly, there will be hundreds who just quietly make sure that they never share that taxi, never work late with a female staffer, and never share that flight to the sales conference with their female workmates. They won't talk about it. They'll never state it as policy, they'll just make sure they are never in that compromised position. Because if they say anything about it, they know they'll be targeted for expulsion from their jobs and their careers. The first rule of Fight Club is do not talk about Fight Club. When I read Jen Psaki's article on CNN, I'll link to that in the low bar, mocking and belittling men, putting self-protection into their professional lives, one of the things I noticed was the author's description of their motive. Psaki writes, quote, "So I understand you think having another man present will help you control your unbridled masculine urges, but doesn't having two men present with a woman make it even more questionable?" She continues, "According to your way of thinking," she's of course talking to men, "I would feel safer, the woman would feel safer as a supporter of the Me Too movement if you had two women present instead." Now when I first read this, I thought this writer is trying to convince the reader that she thinks no meetings alone is a rule to prevent men from getting carried away with their barely contained animalistic sexual urges. Are you effing kidding me? I briefly considered the possibility that she was in fact so delusional and stupid that this was her actual misunderstanding of the Mike Pence rule. Surely, though, her editors at CNN wouldn't have allowed her to publish anything so plainly moronic. But then I remembered this writer isn't actually a moron. She's a former communications director of the White House. When she pretends the Mike Pence rule is for men to use the buddy system and keep each other from transforming into the moonlight into werewolves, it's not stupidity. She's just lying. Although it's not just any lie. The New York Times article of July 10th this year, linked to that in the low bar, condemns the use of the Mike Pence rule as unfairly reducing women to sexual objects on the basis that unchaperoned men would succumb to sexual predatory instinct. The same rationale, by the way, as that used by some sects of the Mohammedan faith to justify the complete enclosure of women within the burqa. After his initial public excoriation, Mississippi State Representative Robert Foster said on Twitter that he was sorry the female journalist requesting a ride-along on his campaign didn't share his views, but his decision was made out of respect to his wife. The second rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club. In the mainstream rebuttals to the Mike Pence Rule, there is a falsehood being repeated with a level of uniformity that suggests coordination. To my mind, the lie being repeated is this: men adopting the Mike Pence Rule know that they are sex monsters, and they require the use of the buddy system to not transform into sexual werewolves should a ray of moonlight reflect off an innocent female co-worker's cleavage. That's why it's time to talk about Fight Club. The Mike Pence Rule is not to protect women from men's rampant runaway sexuality. It's not to honor or respect the wives of married Mike Pence or married Billy Graham or the wife of State Representative Robert Foster. The Mike Pence Rule is to prevent false accusations by women who lie. But if we allow the fiction that it's a male buddy system to prevent you from transforming into the imaginary male sexual werewolf, then you're helping people who hate you build a cage to lock you inside of. Thanks for listening, and as always, have a lovely, lovely day.